we know so little about ourselves? Americans, I think there's a resurgence of trying to connect to our roots and we're trying to understand what does that mean. And I think we're maybe talking to you, it's making me realize how American I really am.
Is that it was a necessity, Americanize as quickly as possible. Become racist, damn Italians, in order to be more white. In order to embrace the American culture, you need also to forget a little bit where you're from.
A lot of people will be interested, as I am, to talk to an Italian as an Italian American.
In general, Italians don't care about Italian Americans. And my name is Luca Coniglio, and I am a teacher, professor of American and modern history in the University of Rome Tor Vergata. Is one of the public university of Rome, universities of Rome. And my field of research is primarily the Italian unification period of the 19th century and the relationship between the Italy and United States in that period. I'm sorry for my pronunciation, my English, I'm not mother tongue. So if any mistake that I do when I'm speaking, so I'm sorry because
also you're excellent.
Audience, I'm sorry, I'll do my best. In general, I have always loved the topic of migrations in general, especially I think Italians gave a lot to world migrations because they're everywhere. And in the United States, they are such a relevant part of society that this has always fascinated me a lot. Like this is one of the, I am so passionate about this topic. I'm always curious about Italian American culture. I read a lot of things, see a lot of things because it's something that is really, really interesting for me. The different branches of my family immigrated to Americas.
Really?
And I have people who immigrated to Argentina, which is a typical route of immigration for Italians. We also have people in New Jersey that unfortunately I was not able to track because last name is one of the most common last name both in Italy and in the US, which is De Luca. Before dying, my grandfather, who I was very, very close to, he was from Abruzzo region in central East Italy. He told me many things about these people who left for New Jersey. He told me that now they're wealthy, that they have like a chain of hotels, but I was not able, unfortunately, to track them. But I have a lot of people who emigrated, like most of the Italian families.
Okay, so that's a common story then for Italians.
They common.
That's interesting. And how is it? I mean, gosh, I have so many questions for you. But how is it perceived when people are thinking about the families that left? How is it talked about?
I mean, I am 35 years old, so let's say for people of my generation, like they generally don't care.
I think a lot of people will be interested, as I am, to talk to an Italian as an Italian American. Really, I'm just an American, right, with Italian ancestry. What is something that surprises Italians about Italian Americans, or something that has surprised you? And feel free to be as controversial as you want, because I'm sure it goes both ways, where we have stereotypes about how the other side, what their life is like.
I don't know where to start. Italians don't care and don't have a lot of ideas or connections with Italian Americans. Just an example, one of the most popular American TV series of all time, The Sopranos, which of course for my personal interest, I watched like 3 times. In Italy, no one knows this series. No one knows who James Gandolfini was. No one, because in general, Italians don't care about Italian Americans. And when they do see them, again, I'm stereotyping a little bit.
Yes.
Every person is different, of course, but in general, when Italians see Italian Americans, they see like a funnier version of them. Let's say it's
Like a caricature.
yeah. They say, and they also see some habits and costumes of their grandfathers. the culture they grew up was the culture of Italy of the 20s, the 30s. So of course they see some common ground, but I think it's limited.
That's interesting. So like the touch point is a generation or two back because that was the
Yes.
time because like my family left I think in 1903 they came over here and that's more than 100 years ago. So
Yeah.
that is I've never thought about that. Oh,
But when I was in the US for my PhD, I remember in Washington, I was doing my research at the Library of Congress in Washington, and I met an Italian American guy who was like 75, 80, and he was able to speak not Italian, but the dialect of his city in Calabria. And this is just to let you understand the situation. So Italian American, I think, compared to other ethnical groups in the United States, they they have retained more of their origins, but their origins are quite different from the cuisine is resembles something of today's Italian cuisine, but is very, 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 very different from what Italians eat today.
I think there's a resurgence of trying to connect to our roots and we're trying to understand what does that mean. And I think we're maybe talking to you, it's making me realize how American I really am. Yes, we have roots here, but things have changed and they turned into new things that are being like passed down.
Two aspects that grabbed my attention. The incredible journey of Italian Americans, journey to become Americans, like where they started very rough times. I read many things about Italian Americans being in many, many positions of powers that we don't even have to mention, judge of the Supreme Court, not necessarily probably now the most popular judge of the Supreme, but that is another topic that we don't want to. And other mayor of New York, governor of New York. Okay, now I'm not doing the most fantastic examples, but just
No, it is though. I mean, to show up 100 years later, New York City is one of the most. I mean,
yeah,
it's New York City, and
yeah,
you're right. Like Mayor Giuliani, and even we have a presidential election that just started up here,
yeah,
and one of the people running for the Republican Party, DeSantis, his family is
yeah, yeah.
Italian. I don't think we've ever had an Italian American president, not yet, but we haven't been here that long either.
Yeah, but it might happen, which was something unthinkable 100 years ago. And also, I read about that economically, Italian Americans in general, they do well than English American, German American. So their journey was incredible. And this really grabbed my attention. And another thing that grabbed my attention was the fact that, again, the connections between the Italians in the United States and the Italian nation building, because something that many Italian Americans don't know, and unfortunately also many Italians don't know, is that Italy is a very young nation, and the period of mass migration was the period immediately after the unification of Italy, because Italy had been divided in the regional states for 1500 years. So in the moment Italy unified, there was this massive migration, especially to the Americas. And this had a lot of outcomes also in the Italian national identity. The fact that immediately after the unification, you had 20, 30% of your people leaving for other countries, many of them because the government wanted them to leave, that was relevant and grabbed a lot of my attention, honestly.
I didn't know it was as high as 30%. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah, yeah. It's called the Italian diaspora for a reason, because the period between 1870 and 1920s, 1930s, the Italian population underwent an incredible amount of migration to other parts of the world. It's incredible.
So it'll be outside the scope of this video, but I think it's as relevant for me to understand the reunification. So my dad's family identify as Sicilian and Southern Italian, but the most recent I could find them was really very low, Italy. Did that have a different name? How would people have understood that at the time of immigrating?
The Italians who left immediately after the unification had very little Italian feelings, like their awareness of being Italians was in general very limited for two reasons. First, because most of people who emigrated to the Americas were people of very low social and economical income. And second, especially in southern Italy, the message of unified Italy arrived in a very blurred way. It was something very complicated, and the affection of southern Italians with the newly formed Kingdom of Italy was still a long way to go, a long way. So, in fact, as you said, you identified Sicilian Americans. This is, for example, Sicily, I think, is the perfect example. In New York and New Jersey area, there are hundreds of thousands of Sicilian Americans. They were very distant from the core of Italy because Italy was unified so late, because they had very little literacy to be involved in the political process, especially people from Sicily, Calabria, far southern Italy. They still identified with the region or even their cities.
Okay.
So this is important. Italian American consciousness arrived later. I think when they are settled in America, their feelings, and this is a typical trait of the Italian culture, their feelings were probably more toward their city or their region.
That's so, this is fascinating to me. I love the stories of people, hearing an individual's story, because we could talk about a group of people, but I feel like it's so much easier to put ourselves in the experience of an actual person that we hear about. Is there an individual case that you've come across in your research of Italian immigration to the United States that has stayed with you?
I mean, this guy is quite famous in America still. Is the story of one of the founders of Bank of America, Pietro Giannini. Maybe some in your audience might know that one of the biggest banks in America, Bank of America, was actually founded by an Italian, co-founded by an Italian American of first generation. This guy was born in California, in San Francisco, by a sailor from Liguria, from the city of Genoa in northwest of Italy. And so it was a first generation Italian American. We're talking that he was born around 1870. And Pietro Giannini, basically, he started with an incredibly innovative idea, borrow money exclusively to poor Italian Americans, because at the time, the problem was that Italian Americans hardly had access to credit because at the time banks only borrowed money to already affluent people. And he completely revolutionized this concept, and he founded this bank known as Bank of Italy. He merged the Bank of Italy with a bank by a, let's say, English American, traditional Anglo-American guy, and they call them Bank of America, which is the Bank of America that we still know.
I've never heard of this person.
We Italians, especially Italian Americans, should be very aware of the incredible achievement of their people. For example, I was shocked, absolutely shocked, and this is probably my favorite Italian Americans of all time. I was shocked that only in 2002, the Congress of the United States passed a bill that recognized that the telephone was not invented by Alexander Graham Bell, but was invented by Antonio Meucci, who was born in Florence but emigrated very early in the United States. And because he was very poor, because he was very sick, because his life was full of trouble, he did not have the money to renew the patent. of his invention. And the patent was bought by Alexander Graham Bell, whose contribution to the invention of the telephone was zero. Most of Americans still think, and you can confirm this, that Alexander.
Right now, I'm learning right now. I did not know that.
And you also, and you are an Italian American, and this is not your fault. It's just the system, of course. The telephone was invented by Antonio Meucci. When I also teach in school, and this is something that I never skip. Like, guys, to my students, you have to know that Antonio Meucci was the real inventor of the telephone. I know that there are many associations of Italian Americans who do a lot to, let's say, remember all the achievement of their compatriots, but there are still things that it's incredible that Americans, and especially Italian Americans, don't know, because they did a lot for their country.
How come we know so little about ourselves?
I think there are two reasons. The first is that it was a necessity and it was right for Italians, and this is something that I studied a lot. It was right for Italians to Americanize as quickly as possible. And many Italian Americans still feel this need, less than before, but they still feel, because I mean, I'm not Italian Americans, but let's say like Italian Americans, when Italians came to America, we have to realize that they were not Irish, they were not English, their culture was so different. Also, their physical aspect was it was much harder, the language completely different. It was much, much harder for them to Americanize compared to Irish or Scandinavians or Germans, because the distance in terms of culture between us and the, let's say, primordial, original Anglo-American culture is far, far bigger than compared to Irish, English, Germans, Scandinavians, etc., etc. You did a lot of videos about this topic, like are the Italians white when the Italians became American? I think it was a necessity. Sometimes it was a matter of surviving. So I understand. And the second, sorry, if you want to say.
No, I'm listening. It is really beautiful to hear your view on it as an Italian. And I feel a little bit ashamed to know so little about it when you're over there studying. Why did we do what we did over here? And and a lot of us don't now.
And the second point is that, in my opinion, the American culture might seem, from European perspective, sometimes it's seen as ridiculous, but I think it's wrong. One of the reasons why America is the most powerful, not only economical, but most importantly, geopolitical power in the world, is because their culture, your culture, in order to be American, you have to embrace certain values, which from a European perspective, and I think it's wrong. From a European perspective, sometimes seems ridiculous, this love for the flag, the national anthem, all this. So in order to embrace the American culture, you need also to forget a little bit where you're from, not completely, but you have to merge in this American patriotism, which is a necessary condition for America to be where they are. So I think these are the two major reasons why Italian Americans forgot a lot about the incredible achievements of their families, their communities in the construction in the building process of America, and also incredible achievements. That is a specifically Italian cultural heritage. What you said before, so you said, in New York, I think I've never found someone whose family was born north of Rome. Italian immigration had precise and specific patterns. Like, what I'm telling you is that basically, if we imagine our mind the map of the Atlantic Ocean from Europe, from Italy to the American hemisphere, people from southern Italy almost exclude to US and Canada. Okay. people, and by saying this, you might have the wrong impression that only people from southern Italy migrated, which is absolutely not the case. If you go to Argentina, even more if you go to Brazil, one example is Brazilian President Bolsonaro, 90%, including Jorge Bergoglio, the Pope, 90% of people who emigrated to Brazil and Argentina are from northern Italy. So the pattern is very, very specific and with very few exceptions. And these have the tremendous outcomes on so many things. The simplest part, food, pasta, and pizza, the most iconic food, the most iconic Italian American food, right? Why is that in Brazil they all eat rice and they eat very little pasta? Because in Veneto region, Venice region, in Pope's Bergoglio region, Piedmont or West, pasta arrived with the, let's say, early globalization of Italy in the 20th century. They exclusively ate rice. The most typical food of the Italian American tradition, for example, spaghetti with meatballs, these things are from the South. Pizza, they are from the South. Like the Italian American culture, as the Italian American cuisine, are specifically from Southern Italy.
So you're saying like what we consider Italian culture here is really it's Southern Italian culture in the
Yes,
United States.
it is 100%.
Wow.
The Italian American experience, also the way Italian Americans speak now, not anymore, not your generation, but your grandfather, the way Italian Americans are portrayed in this, let's say, mafia movies and TV series is, let's say, is mocking Southern Italian accents. Also, that kind of hand gestures. It's a specifically Southern Italian culture.
Wow.
If you went to Brazil, if you see Italian American, Italian Brazilians, they're completely different from you guys. Not only somewhat ethnically, let's say, because in general, Southern Italians are darker than Northern Italians. There is not a rule, but in general.
Yes.
Also, last names are completely different. Like
This is incredible. I think a lot of Italian Americans, I think a lot of Americans, and maybe even beyond, would be interested because I think sometimes we don't realize the stereotype. What's the origin story for this?
Especially in Naples region and Sicily.
Yes, and that's exactly where my family.
But because it's normal. The three regions that gave the most immigrants to the US are Abruzzo, which is in central Italy, but the culture is southern Italian, Campania, which is the region of Naples, and Sicily, which is, of course, Sicily. So the lynching is very complicated phenomena, but unfortunately, we have to say, I am sure that you know the beautiful movie Green Book, in which and the police stop them and they're like, "Why are you with a black person? You know that black people cannot and blah blah blah." And then he asked the policeman asked the last name of the main character, and he said, "Ah, of course, you are Italian." He says the N word. You and them, you are the same. So it is normal for you guys to get along, okay? That is the perfect paradigm of why there was lynching, in my opinion, because Southern Italians, they were generally darker and they were perceived by the mainstream American ethnicity and American public opinion as non-Northern European whites. So I think this played an incredible, this is a topic that we could talk 7 days, but the, unfortunately, the ethnical reason was by far the biggest, and Italians had to fight a lot. Sometimes they had to use, I don't know the term in English, unfortunately, sometimes they had to become racist, them Italians, in order to be more white. Italian citizenship rules are completely different from the American ones and are based on this concept known as ius sanguinis, from Latin was the law of the blood. More workforce and more people that maybe got rich in the Americans and bring money back to Italy. So we will make citizenship incredibly easy to obtain for your sons and grandsons. And this is something you, Danielle, I don't know if you have ever thought about this, if you have ever researched about this. The Italian citizenship works like, if you are Danielle Romero, who has never been in Italy, maybe doesn't speak a word of Italian. I'm generalizing. Okay?
No, you're correct so far. Yeah.
Okay. No, but not in general. But you can show with papers that your grandfathers were Italians. You go to the city of origin of your family, and you can obtain citizenship in the blink of an eye.
Wow.
Instead, and this is one of the most controversial topics in Italian politics now, if you are born and raised in Italy from, I don't know, a Chinese family, to obtain the Italian citizenship for you is a nightmare. It took more than 20 years. You have to be adult, you have to be to have a residence in Italy for at least 18 years. It's a nightmare. It's
people who were born there, but
yes.
they're of a different
yes.
background.
They don't have, let's say, Italian blood.
Wow.
Now I don't want to enter in today's politics, so
Yeah.
I'm not gonna express my opinion about this. But I'm telling you that now probably doesn't make any sense. So I'm saying my opinion. Back in the day, I understand why the Italian government made this.
Oh yeah.
Because they wanted people to
come back.
To come back. So
Yes.
it was, but this, in my opinion, had to be changed a long time ago, in my humble opinion. Having said that, so the Italian government honestly did not get involved a lot in the discriminations of Italians in the United States, also because they wanted to maintain a very good, especially commercial relationship with the various governments of the United States.
There's a lot of people on the channel who I think are excited to understand more about their Italian American heritage, which again is different than being Italian, but kind of understanding the experience. And you know so much about that, even though you're not an American. How would you recommend people like us to start understanding our history better, or reconnecting, or like what would you suggest would be a good first step? Because a lot of us as Americans, we really don't know a lot, especially my generation. I'm 37. Like, just, my grandpa has already passed away. I can't ask him anymore. What should we do?
But you know what, Danielle, I think the first thing to know would be to study a little bit of Italian history, which is incredibly interesting in general, in my opinion, especially if you have that Italian blood calling from within. I think it would be very interesting to read something about it. So Italian history is so interesting from the very beginning, from the Roman times till the end. So I think the best thing to know is to read something about Italian history, to watch a movie, to watch a TV series, for people who have the possibility to come to Italy to see maybe there's more, because Italy normally, because I'm also in a previous life, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about immigration. I was a tour guide in Rome, and so I tour guided thousands of Americans. And normally the American route in American journey in Italy when it comes to tourism is only these big cities: Venice, Florence, Rome, Amalfi Coast, which I totally understand, because they're the most famous places, easier to reach, but especially if you have the excuse to have some relatives who emigrated from a certain town. Italy is at its best in small villages, which are breathtaking all across the Italian peninsula. So, for if people have the possibility, go on the internet, look for the place your grandparents or great grandparents were born, and maybe one day you can go there and visit and find some relatives and maybe have also the citizenship, which for you guys is much easier than for, again, from someone who was born in Italy but with no Italian blood.
That's great advice to not just study Italy as a whole, but what community.
For Italian Americans who are interested, learn the beautiful language that Italian is. That is a great way to get in touch with your heritage.